Recording has started.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the SDGs, UNICEF's Evaluation Office and Real Solutions Inc. webinar. Sorry, what happened? As you're aware, this is part of a series of webinars that we are organizing jointly, SDGs and UNICEF, and normally with some other partner, in this case, Real Solutions Inc. The title of this webinar is Using Evaluative Thinking to Support the Effective Implementation of SDGs. It is not business as usual for evaluators. The presenter is our dear friend and colleague Robert Lahi, and Kasem will be the moderator, Kasem El Sadiq. I will introduce Kasem, and Kasem will kindly introduce our presenter. So, Kasem El Sadiq is an international expert in policy and program evaluation. With more than 18 years of experience, Kasem has provided consulting services to various complex programs and technical assistance throughout North America, the Middle East. In addition to his track record in the public sector, Kasem is credited for her deep engagement in recent regional and global evaluations. Sorry, I have problems with my screen.
Okay.
So Kasem is currently the Vice Chair of Eval SDGs, a network established under the umbrella of Eval Partners to support the implementation of the Agenda 2030. More specifically, Kasem is leading Eval Partners' flagship program 1 that aims at strengthening national evaluation systems and advocating for its integration in national and global review and follow-up processes. Kasem is also a member of the team and a co-author of Evaluative IIED briefing papers that you for sure know, and if you don't know, we invite you to visit our website, sdgs.org. Without further ado, I give the floor to Kasem. Kasem, thank you very much. He will moderate the session and he will kindly introduce our presenter today. Over to you.
Thank you, Ada. Good morning, good evening, and good day for all of the participants. It's a pleasure to have you all among this crowd. I'm happy to, as part of this series, to introduce Robert Lahi. I believe that most of us knows who Robert Lahi is, but briefly, and in order not to take much of the time, Robert is one of the renowned evaluators and public sector in Canada. He has founded the Canada Center for Excellence for Evaluation, and is responsible for a huge amount of he's done huge work in terms of advising Canada and other international organizations, both regional and global. So he's all over the world by all means. And we all remember him a couple of months ago in Bishkek. Was it in Bishkek when he was one of the keynote, in fact, one of the resource persons there, leading us and getting much more of his insights into the evaluation practices. Robert has presented extensively in the field, last but not least, he taught evaluation methods and practices at the University of Ottawa, and he's one of the thought leaders within our community, our partners community. I think there's no, we cannot give him the credit as much as we can, but I'll leave the floor to him, and I invite Robert to kick off this webinar, and I'll be moderating the session. Hopefully, 45 minutes for Robert, if that's fine, and then we'll take a couple of questions and interventions from the floor. Robert, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Kasem. Am I coming through fine?
Yep.
Okay. Celeste, I note that when you type, it gets very noisy. I don't know if you mute your mic, but I want to thank Ada for the invitation to make this presentation, Kasem for the very kind introduction, flattering, and Celeste and Ingram in UNICEF office for the technical support they've been providing to make this possible. So let me start off by giving you the bottom line on really what is the thesis I'm presenting here, and that there's probably no surprise to many people. The introductions of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, has introduced significant challenges for countries, significant challenges in terms of both implementation as well as measurement. To me, it offers a very significant opportunity for evaluation. In other words, we'll turn these challenges, we'll turn it on its ear and say there are opportunities here. But in order, I believe, for those opportunities to be realized, I think some changes and adjustments are probably required in terms of some of the thinking and some of the actions of key players that represent evaluation. And that's really what I'm speaking to this morning. I would also say there is some urgency, I believe. We are in the third year of a 15-year element of the SDGs. That sounds like a long time, but evaluation capacity development is a long-term initiative. And so I would say that as evaluators and champions of evaluation, we should be thinking of this in a sense of some urgency. So let me just give you a bit of an outline. What I would like to do is to just spend a very brief moment, a bit of background on some of these. What are these challenges? Try to, in effect, unpack the challenges into more practical dimensions, and then speak to what I refer to as the adjustments that may be needed in terms of what I say as it's not business as usual. So two important dates in the recent past. 2015, the UN declared the Year of Evaluation, and one hopes that where expectations have been raised, that over time these will be realized, and we don't find ourselves in what Andy Warhol used to refer to as 15 minutes of fame that occurred in 2015. But it's also the end of the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, to then see the introduction in 2016 of the SDGs framed within the UN's Agenda 2030. A much broader frame of reference, 17 goals as opposed to 8, all countries across the globe, 169 targets, 230 indicators. So it is quite sweeping. And here they are, the 17 goals. The mechanisms for monitoring, there are two broad: global monitoring, which is focusing on those indicators and the statistics to measure them, but there is also a notion of follow-up and review that would be country-led, it would be voluntary, and the word review is being used. There's I would say, a passive implication to evaluation, but the question is, will this involve evaluation? And Eval SDGs has done considerable work in terms of promoting and really trying to advocate for the use of evaluation in the follow-up and review exercise. But what are some of these? This is what we know in terms of measuring the SDGs. To date, the focus has tended to be on the statistics and indicators. There tends to be little attention on evaluation and the concept of learning. It's been referenced that the goals, of course, and the targets, they're political and aspirational, and there's both good aspects and bad aspects associated with that. Now, regarding these specific indicators, first I would say I think the statisticians who were involved in identifying really should be given credit because they were quick off the mark, and it has frankly inspired some level of data development within countries. So that's good. But the interagency expert group on the SDG indicators has also noted that, well, they don't cover all aspects of goals and targets. And if one takes a closer look at a specific goal, specific targets, and the associated indicators, it fairly quickly becomes apparent that that is the case. The data for several remain unavailable. Targets are not always quantified. And then we have the issue of the capacity gaps in countries that needs to be addressed. This is a big one. And as I say, it's an area where there certainly is movement. And so that is encouraging. Unfortunately, for evaluation, it's been described as a missed opportunity to date in terms of the link into the voluntary national reviews. Now, this particular quote came from the Eval SDG IIED briefing note of 2017. It refers to the first round of VNRs, voluntary national reviews, that were done in 2016, 22 countries. But there was a follow-up that was carried out there's a briefing note from January 2018 by Eval SDGs and the IIED, reporting on the results of 43 countries that produced VNRs. And it's quite similar in terms of the findings of this next wave, all to suggest that evaluation isn't, to date, still playing a strong role. So what I use the term unpacking. Well, let's try to better understand the nature of the challenges that are faced in terms of implementing and measuring SDG progress. I've identified 11 here on this slide and the next slide, and just quickly to address it, because I think if one is looking for solutions, we need to, as I say, unpack, bring it down to a digestible level where practical solutions can be sought. Initially, I guess one would say is the SDGs, are they being linked to the national plan? Moreover, within a country, there are institutional questions about coordination across the different agencies in terms of implementation, also coordination in terms of possible measurement and perhaps evaluation efforts. The data development strategy for country. Again, I've mentioned this tends to be, in my mind, one of the bright lights in terms of a challenge that's being addressed. A very important one here is the issue of the subnational cross-cutting issues. The SDGs has put significant emphasis on this. It also creates some quite significant challenges. Will the SDGs be linked to I use the acronym NMES, National Monitoring and Evaluation System, or would they be standalone? But the question is, does the country even have a national monitoring and evaluation system? What is its readiness in terms of being able to measure and monitor and evaluate? Many countries talk about their M&E system, but the question is there actually an E in the M&E? My experience is that often this is missing, or it's muted. Question then is there current capacity and experience with evaluation? If it's low, then issues of capacity building become paramount. But there's also the question of political support for evaluation. In other words, the demand side. Does it exist? Is it real? And part of that comes down to the understanding or awareness of how evaluation can be used to support country performance. So the SDGs aside, if the SDGs didn't exist, evaluation in the best possible world would be a part of the governance system in any one country. But in order for that to happen, there really has to be an understanding that it's beneficial and useful to the performance of the country and its own development. Well, it's a menu of challenging issues, and what I've tried to do is to say, well, okay, if countries are seriously trying to deal with all of these things, how can we flip this, turn these challenges into opportunities? The SDGs occupy a very high profile internationally. We as evaluators certainly think that evaluation can play quite a significant role in supporting both implementation and measurement. But how do we proceed from here? When we see that the voluntary national reviews, for example, have not tended to include evaluation, and more than that, there are questions about the awareness and understanding. So what I'm offering here, and this is really quite simplistic, I start with this 4-point action. I'll call it an action plan. That's my starting point. And my second point is to then address the issue of what do various actors need to do to follow through. So these 4 points here are really starting with a reality check. Now, the World Bank traditionally has used the term readiness assessment. It's a quick snapshot. Where is the country, or where does it want to be in terms of where is it with evaluation capacity? In doing this, my suggestion would be to take a broader system approach. Don't simply, as often has happened in the past, to look at the supply side, the number of evaluators that may be operating in a country or in a region. That's important. But in order for a sustainable evaluation capacity, we need to think about demand. We need to think about the enabling environments, the political drivers as well. And in doing that, I would say, this is my third point, don't assume that senior officials know or even want evaluation. Fourth, I would say what I think needs to happen, and this isn't really simply within at a country level, I would say this needs to be something addressed by all champions for evaluation of the SDGs, and that is proactively challenging officials on why evaluation should have a seat at the table in terms of monitoring and review of the SDGs. The more recent eval SDG IAD briefing papers have talked about made recommendations that the voluntary national review, the guidelines need to be modified to ensure that evaluation gets linked in And I would say that's an important point. It's an important point, I think, that needs to be brought to senior tables within UN Secretariat, UN agencies, and country officials. And the set of actors that I'll now turn to, I think, need to remind themselves that one of the things that evaluation is often intended to do, and that is this phrase, speak truth to power. And I think we need to be perhaps doing that a little more forcefully in this case. So what are the kinds of adjustments? If I'm saying it's not business as usual for evaluators, the broad evaluation community, international agencies, country officials, it's not business as usual if we want to take advantage, I believe, of those opportunities that are presenting themselves. So let's turn first to the evaluators and the evaluation community. Well, if we think of SDG implementation as a continuum, from first thoughts through to ultimately implementation and over time progress and attainment of targets, well, the evaluators have a skill set that can support organizations and countries at all points along that continuum. Early on, in terms of assisting in developing frameworks, indicators that are relevant to the country, the use of theory of change, which evaluators, it's a great evaluation tool that could be supportive in this case of SDG implementation and measurement. Ultimately, evaluability assessment, and not simply looking at measuring results and outcomes. That's important. That should be part of it, but also issues of process, which become important, particularly in the early days of SDGs, SDG implementation. Now, this starts moving evaluators into for some would be considered non-traditional use of evaluation or non-traditional ways that they operate. And some would say that this really should be rejected because it starts influencing whether or not the evaluator is independent. It's a debate that quite frankly is not new. I made a presentation to the Canadian Evaluation Society in 2006 that spoke to the whole issue of independence for evaluators. And I certainly feel that in today's world, I felt that in 2006 as well, but in today's world, we need to ensure that this broad skill set of evaluators really can be offering the maximum value to the various requirements that are needed for SDG implementation. I guess what I'm saying is that we ought not to let the independence factor limit our role. We don't need to operate as internal auditors operate where independence is paramount. We need to be thinking in more participatory ways. That doesn't remove the need to be objective in everything we do, and it probably has implications for the code of ethics, our practice standards, and governance systems within which evaluation operates. What I would say, though, is if we want to promote evaluative thinking and a culture of evaluation and learning, we need to operate in a way that is not simply treating the evaluator as independent. So let me now move to the international agencies, UN agencies, development banks, bilaterals, multilaterals. What I would say is that we need to, excuse me, the SDGs have introduced some new unique challenges for UN agencies, the international partners. There is a need to bridge a gap between the SDG aspirations that one hears of at senior levels, headquarters within a UN agency or the UN system itself, and the SDG realities that manifest themselves at a regional level, at a country level. I would say more effort needs to take place in terms of what one might call the how-to with regard to SDG implementation. But the SDGs have also introduced a horizontality, and with that, there is somewhat of a blurring of roles, and one might even say turf across UN agencies. So more collaborative efforts are needed. Well, at a country level, the UN, certainly through UN country teams, is approaching this in terms of the sharing of information. But it goes beyond, I really do believe, sharing of information to actually coordinate across organizations. And more than that, at a country level, where there may be a deficiency of M&E or evaluation support within the UN operations, there also may be a parallel significant need for evaluation capacity building or M&E capacity building. And this would be an area where I would say the UN country team, working with, if this is possible, the UN evaluation group, UNEG. I would say that UNEG probably needs to take a more proactive role in terms of the capacity building, maybe more proactive than it has been in recent years, because I think they do offer a real potential for being able to support what I feel is quite a significant capacity gap across many, many countries, and that is too few resources to actually carry out evaluation, too little understanding at both the demand and the supply side in terms of evaluation. So I guess what I'm saying here is that the UN agencies are really being called upon to work in ways that will probably or would probably be challenging for them. Having worked in a country at a country level just a few months ago, I can certainly see progress being made there, but there clearly is a significant capacity gap, certainly in the countries, and these are countries in all parts of the world that I've been involved with. There's a significant evaluation capacity gap. So it is quite a challenge, and the resources to meet that challenge, I think, would work better if they were somehow pooled or at least coordinated. So if we move now to country level officials responsible for SDG follow-up review, what I would say is first of all, I think it's important to emphasize that there's no quick fix when it comes to evaluation capacity building. Let me say, I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. The federal government here has had an evaluation policy for some 40 years. And I would say where some might say that Canada is one of the leaders internationally in evaluation, I think we are, but quite frankly, we're still working at it. And in fact, every country is still working at it. So the job is never done in terms of building capacity and sustaining it. But the demand side, and I'm using this term in terms of thinking of evaluation as a market, the supply and demand side, it needs to start with an acceptance of the importance of evaluation. And to evaluators and advocates of evaluators, that's an obvious one. It's less obvious at a political level, though, but it's necessary to get that acceptance at a political level if it's going to make traction. My concern when I read the most recent report in terms of the voluntary the VNRs from the 43 countries is that there's a great possibility that the follow-up and review exercise is going to be perhaps provide some information, but to a large extent provide politically motivated progress reports rather than some in-depth understanding that would be useful to the country. So I think that in terms of building evaluation within countries, the officials that are the advocates, the champions, and they may be the people who are associated with the follow-up and review exercise, but they may also be the voluntary organization of professional evaluators, the VOPEs in the country, the NGOs that are working there, the international partners, others. There needs to be a focus not just on building the supply of evaluators, but trying to encourage and look through the demand lens. What do senior officials need for the country? For what purpose? And what is it that evaluation can deliver? So I think though we need to at times modify our expectations about what evaluation can deliver in the short run, and especially if there's limited evaluation capacity in a country. Well, I think it's important to focus the evaluation efforts on the select priority areas for evaluation, and then plan for future capacity building efforts. It's probably a modest start to building evaluation, but it's a start. And hopefully it then becomes an investment in building evaluation capacity. I would also say even a modest start can serve as a demonstration of where and how evaluation can be used and contributing to support national development. And I think this is one of the important things, is that the SDGs are important globally. To individual countries, the SDGs are important, but to individual countries, the SDGs, I think, typically fall within the link to their national development plan. And that's why I really do think that the SDG implementation and the evaluation and monitoring of SDGs really ought to be linking into national monitoring and evaluation system and capacity building associated with that, if we're going to see sustainable monitoring and evaluation over time. I guess the other thing I would say here is that I'm beating the bushes to support the building of evaluation, but we need to remember as evaluators that that's not our end goal. Our end goal really is good governance and sound decision making. And evaluation serves as a key component, I think, in terms of serving as a tool to support that. So the adoption of, for example, of an evaluation policy in a country should be regarded as a positive, but it's far from an end. And I think it's important to build this into our thinking, that we need to ensure that our advocacy for evaluation continues on after such key and important milestones are achieved. To finish off this presentation, I've got two slides, and these are just some practical tips that I think can be supportive of linking evaluation to the SDGs. And I put this in because I think it's important in this broader context of building a culture for evaluation, or a culture of evaluation, or the term evaluative thinking within organizations and within countries. So I'll just go through this very quickly, and then we can take some questions. There's a real focus on data through the indicators and data development, and this is good, but we need to be thinking beyond simply targets and monitoring. It really doesn't offer an explanation. We need to plummet below the surface. In order to do that, we need information that goes beyond simply the global indicators that have been identified. In terms of evaluating the SDGs, if we establish a roadmap, and it's the kind of thing that I alluded to earlier, thinking of the SDG implementation as a continuum, that roadmap could identify various points along the way where the SDGs could be supported by evaluation. Building evaluation into an SDG implementation plan seems like an obvious element, but perhaps not happening as often as it should, or perhaps not at all if it's not being built into the voluntary national reviews. I'm mentioning about the demand side, and I keep coming back to this because I think it's particularly important. I think we need to be thinking about real country level needs regarding the use of evaluation. And it's not to suggest that the SDGs don't provide real country needs. Some of it is the optic. And the optic is that if it appears to be imposed by an international external source, then perhaps it doesn't get viewed with the same level of acceptance as whether or not the very same need has been identified as a real country need. I would say that in again thinking of this continuum of SDG implementation and the kinds of needs and the kinds of support that evaluation can bring, we need to be thinking more than simply outcomes or results and measuring those outcomes or results. We also need to be thinking about and understanding the programs and policies that are put in place to support SDG achievement of SDG goals and targets. Are they working? Are they not working? Why? Why not? There's also a need to understand, are there unintended effects that may be resulting from these various efforts? Finally, I would say that where there are many players that really need to be engaged, and players from all sectors, it's important that this happen early on. And in order for this to happen, to facilitate this, it's then important that there are various forums for sharing, using information, to get engagement, to get an understanding, to increase transparency, So we're talking about not only government officials, but private sector, civil society. What is important, I think, in thinking of this is that these various groups have different levels of understanding about evaluation and what it can bring. But the same groups also have different levels of political power. And it's probably an inverse relationship. So the ones who are most knowledgeable about evaluation probably have the least level of power in terms of decision making in a country. But I'm saying this because I think these kinds of meetings and exchanges need to be built in really as ongoing exercises. The VOPIs, for example, they bring an important role in terms of training and development, advocacy, but they typically would not have the power to move the yardsticks on evaluation. Certainly what I have seen, but bringing the various interest groups together allows for a sharing and using of information, an engagement, and ultimately a learning about evaluation. So I think that this proactive engagement really becomes particularly important. But as I'm saying, and as I said at the outset, I think there is some urgency. We're in the third year, and I think these early days become still quite important for establishing roles and relationships, and frankly, a role for evaluation. So I'm going to stop there, but let me just mention, here are some references. I've mentioned the Eval SDGs, the IIED. This is not their full range of briefing papers. You could go to their website. These are some that I've used as I've developed this, but there's many others. The other three I'm very familiar with because I wrote all three. I did quite a bit of work with the International Labour Organization, the Evaluation Group, and they have done some very interesting work in terms of leading efforts to try and understand the relationship between evaluation and the SDGs, one of which is the diagnostic instrument that is identified here. The last one, the UNEG, now it was done in 2012, and quite frankly, much of that was based on work that I had done directly with countries in various parts of the world. The fact that it's 2012, in many respects, I would say it's still very, very relevant in 2018. And one of the areas in there that I think is quite interesting is some of the suggestions being made about how international agencies could work and collaborate to support evaluation capacity building. So for those who are interested, I've provided my contact coordinates, and I'm going to turn it back to Kassem now.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation and ideas. And I would like to, I'm really delightful to see that Eval SDG IIED briefing notes are being used by experts in the field, by thought leader. I mean, this would reflect to a large extent the credibility on one hand and the outreach of the network. Of Eval SDG as a network.
Kassem, can I just make a point on that? And I meant to say this. I think those briefing notes are excellent, and I would strongly suggest and advocate that that people read them. They're particularly good because they're very well written, and they're generally in non-technical language, so they can be used with I think a broad set of audiences. So well done, Evaluative SDGs and IIED.
Thank you. That was the intention, indeed. Two things that probably I've picked up a lot of stuff from what you presented, but I'd like to highlight two things. One,
Hello, Kassem. We lost you.
One, by acknowledging the work of the statistician. Yes. Hello.
You were cut off in the middle of your speech, Kassem. Could you repeat what you were saying?
Okay. I just want to start by acknowledging your call to engage other partners, the non-usual suspects, and one of whom are basically the statistician, and the other would be the auditors. We were lately, as a network, invited to an event by the Institute for the Supreme Court and auditors, and you wouldn't believe the amount of work and experience they're building towards getting themselves prepared to monitor and follow up on the SDGs at the national level. So that's something very interesting for us. The roadmap you've described and the 4 steps of turning challenges into opportunities is very much appreciated, and I would call on our participants to jump in and to express their views and to probably throw some insights or questions. So the floor is open for whoever wants to either have a reflection or raise a question. We still have another kind of 20-30 minutes of doing so.
Any immediate reaction?
Guy, do you want to take the floor? Just unmute yourself and intervene, please. He mentioned that he has some questions. He's the director of the Evaluation Office of ILO. Go ahead.
Ada, I think you should go first. Can you hear me? Ada?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think you should go first. You're the host.
No. I put my question already in the chat bar. Why don't you kick off?
Okay, good then. Actually, I want to thank Bob for this presentation, which I thought was very insightful. And as Bob mentioned, he has worked together with UNEC in 2012. And actually, that was when I was co-chair together with UNICEF of the working group on NECD. And that piece that Bob produced was excellent and is still being used by many. And as Bob mentioned, he has worked with us on developing various tools to improve our knowledge about evaluability of our country program with the SDGs. Now, I share a lot of the concerns Bob has. I feel that after 3 years, we are still trying to get our act together. 3 years of SDGs, and we're still trying to find out how we're going to deal with this. That is something we should be worried about. And what bothers me most is that even in countries where we thought capacity would be strong, we actually found out through our diagnostic instrument, and Bob is aware of this, that even countries with a strong reputation face severe challenges in participating in the SDGs and the national reviews. And the challenge that we all have to strengthen their capacity is huge. At the same time, we see a proliferation of activities taking place, and there is very little coordination. Obviously, the time frame we have ahead of us is limited, and resources as well. And Bob asked the question, what is UNEC doing about all of this? Now, I'm also part of the working group on the SDGs, and I was in touch with Indran yesterday and today because we want to start the working group to become a bit more proactive. And there are quite a few ideas. There's a roadmap being considered for mainstreaming evaluation for SDG results throughout the UNEC community. We had a meeting here in Geneva that was hosted by WHO. Indran came down for that. And we are now looking at an action plan. most likely we're going to see to what extent we can, for example, combine the various tools that are being developed by ILO, UNDP, possibly UNICEF and others, how we can combine them for common UNEC use. I think we also have agreed that we need to ensure that capacity building in countries is being done in a combined manner instead of us going all our own way. So these are a few things that I think UNEC can and should do, and I want to thank Bob for bringing this up and for again stressing the need for the evaluation officers to step to the plate, because if we don't do it, I can see the auditors already actually getting on the scene and possibly becoming more active in this field than we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy. Kasem has problems to see in the chat bar. Bob, I would like to ask you whether you want to comment one by one, or shall I read a group of questions and then you?
Yeah, let me just a couple of thoughts here to both Kasem and Guy. First of all, Guy, thanks so much. And it's nice to see that UNEG is moving on things. My understanding was there was I guess an evaluation of UNEG in the not too distant past. So it's perhaps with some of that self-reflection or internal or review, that recognition of things to be done, and it sounds like you and others are certainly thinking about this and taking action. So that's very good. Kasem, I couldn't really hear what you were saying. It was breaking up, but you mentioned this notion of the auditors playing a role, and I believe that was at a country level. Guy also mentioned, the concern that the auditors could be stepping in, and I think that is always a potential threat, because the notion of audit, whether true or not, and I had responsibility in government for audit on more than one occasion, so I speak from some practice, but it typically in most circles has more credibility than evaluation. Is that a good thing? No, I don't think it is. But it also, the auditors can focus on collection of data associated with some specific indicators, checking boxes. It can provide information quickly. Is it deep? Is it thorough? No. But it's something that I think the evaluation community should be thinking about. So I'll turn it back to you, Celeste. Hello?
Hi, thank you. So I will read the chats the questions.
I will take that over, Celeste.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm in coordination with Kasem, and this is Sadabov. So I will read and 2 or 3, and I will ask some others to take the floor. So we do a more interactive session. The first question is actually the one I included, that asks about the political dimension of evaluation. Do you think that in this context, in the context of the 2030 agenda, the political dimension is more relevant, has to be embedded probably in more explicit ways than it was before, that there are competencies that are important for evaluators in the sense that they have to have the ability to interact with politicians and eventually to influence them as well? That is one question. Then Musarrat Yusuf from Pakistan says, thank you for this thoughtful presentation. Are there any examples from PNRs of countries so far where they have used evaluations in any way for reporting? And how to access those, well, we know that they are not, but I'll leave the floor to you. And then, well, I will stop in this round and then we will continue. There are more questions. Then there is another, says, thanks, Robert, for the nice and brief presentation. I have a question. How and based on what is the deadline for SDGs? The deadline for SDGs was decided as 2030. Is it realistic to meet all these 17 goals? But the big questions beyond the presentation. But I will stop there and we have another round. Bob, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I picked up 3 questions from what you have just said. And the first question, okay, has to do with the thinking about the. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my conversation sidebar and it keeps moving.
Well, let me remind you, the first question is about the political dimension of evaluation.
Yeah, the political dimension, I think the political dimension is particularly important. And when we talk about that, I think it's the political dimension within an organization, whether that's a ministry within a country, whether it's at the national level in a country, whether it's the senior officials within a UN or international agency, whether it's the UN Secretariat. I think all of these things are important in the context of thinking about evaluation and the SDGs. I think that the political dimension, which is part of the demand side, would be important even if we weren't talking about SDGs. So what do we do? Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize the importance of it. Secondly, if we're talking about capacity building, I think we need to be thinking about increasing an awareness and understanding. And it's a different kind of, it's not the type of training that we would be subjecting future evaluators to. I would use the word orientation to understand. And this is where I think and I commend the Eval SDG IIED briefings in using non-technical language. But we need to make sure that these messages find their way to audiences, and that in what is one of the reasons why I was suggesting that it's important to ensure that there are opportunities for groups to meet and these fora that have to be not just one-offs, but really built in over time. I'm not going to say anything more about that right now, but I think if one turned to that 2012 UNIG paper, you'll get a sense for some of what I've just said, some of it. It doesn't talk SDGs. So the second question, the second question was something about was it 2030?
The second question was about whether, from Musarat, whether they are examples of VNRs that have actually used evaluations.
Yeah.
And the third question is about the deadline.
Yeah.
How the deadline of 2030 was established.
Right. I would suggest, in terms of the VNRs, go to the briefing paper that Eval SDG would have on its website, the one dated January 2018, and that I think will offer the source in terms of the follow through to really understand to what extent evaluation is even being mentioned. Now, it's still early days, so has evaluation actually been used? I think it's probably premature, but to say that it has, but we would hope that evaluation is at least being identified and built into the planning of the monitoring and review. But in terms of getting an understanding of what has happened with the VNRs, the one I would turn to is that January 2018 briefing paper. 2030, is it realistic to meet all those 17 goals? Well, I think this probably comes back to those two words associated with the SDGs, political and aspirational. And as I said, they're both positive elements and negative elements associated with that. One wants to perhaps set targets high. Is it realistic? Well, in some cases, perhaps. In many cases, probably not. But you work towards those goals. The fact that it is so broad, there was criticism. I recall reading when I first started doing work with Guy at the ILO, looking at evaluation in the SDGs. There was criticism across a very broad international community about the SDGs as being too broad and unachievable. I don't think there's a definitive answer there. I think we can probably realistically say that all 17 goals are not going to be met in many countries, if any country. But does that mean that the strategy is wrong? Well, that's for many people to discuss and debate. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. We'll go to another round of questions.
Sure.
Allow me to take advantage of my position now and to say that probably also we will not know by 2030 whether some countries have met or not the SDGs, because if there are no evidence, if there is no evaluation that can provide the evidence to state so. There is a comment, it's just a comment related to a previous question from Nazanin from Iran. She says, in some country context, like Iran, political dimension of monitoring SDG is a challenge. Hence, political dimension of the evaluation is vital to push forward. And that is a comment, and there are two more questions. The next question is from Brooke, from UNITAR. I would like to ask Brooke to please unmute himself and to take the floor and ask the question directly to you. Over, Brooke. Thanks very much.
Hi, Ada, can you hear me? Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Brooke.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I thank you very much for the presentation.
Sure.
Given the timeline that you mentioned, I mean, the fact that we're 3 years into the implementation of the agenda, and the fact that evaluation is yet to inform the VNRs and so forth, maybe should we not adopt more of a make it big, keep it simple approach to this? It seems as though that we place a lot of emphasis on the complexity, on systems theory, systems approaches, which reflects reality on the one hand, but it seems as though it may, maybe scare away people from, developing more the demand side for evaluation and the need to undertake evaluations of programs and policies and what have you to support the implementation of the agenda. So I was just kind of thinking about that from that side of things. Over to you.
Okay. When I use the word systems, I don't think of an overly complicated engineering system. I think of something that's pretty simple, that starts with a recognition that we need to think of both demand and supply, particularly when most of the efforts in terms of capacity building have been on the supply side. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what you mean by a make it big, keep it simple approach.
I think, yeah, what I was in making reference to that, what I was thinking about is, how do we really get those individuals in the position to demand evaluations in the context of the 2030 agenda? How do we make it happen? How do we get the buy-in? Because if there's not demand for evaluations, there's not going to be evaluations taking place.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I agree that we need to work on both demand and supply simultaneously, but it seems as though really demand is central to ensuring that evaluation takes place. And if evaluation takes place, then it will naturally, of course, come up with evidence and inform learning and improvement and so forth.
Okay. Well, this I'm not sure if this is directly answering your point. It's in the presentation. I mentioned demand several times. I also mentioned the notion of ensuring that evaluation is meeting a real need. By that I mean the real need of the country. And if there's little evaluation capacity, which is the case in many countries, then I've also said keep it simple, which by that I mean let's not look for wall-to-wall evaluation work, but let's focus on a few evaluations, and it may be at any one point in time only one. It may be two, but they serve a real need. And I think if we want to foster an interest in evaluation, it really does have to serve a real need, and it also has to deliver, and deliver in a timely fashion, and deliver information that can be useful and used. So all of this to say that maybe what we are looking at is something that resembles some fairly modest evaluation work that doesn't take a significant amount of time, does not involve significant resources, but provides information back that serves a priority and real need of officials. I've also said maybe this can then be used as a demonstration of the value in evaluation. Those are the kinds of things that potentially can be helping build the demand for evaluation. We can talk about building awareness of the value in evaluation and having orientation sessions for senior officials and political types. But I think they also want to see the real goods. And if we're going to be able to deliver the real goods, it may be a fairly modest element that of an evaluation, but it's serving, as I said, and repeatedly, a real need. I guess the other thing that needs to happen is within an organization or within a country, this has to be rolled out in a way that's not going to be overly burdensome, and it has to be done in a way that ideally you've got champions, and those champions have significant or enough leadership quality and political power that they will sustain beyond just some small demonstration projects. So those are just some ideas that I think are important. I mean, these are things I've said in terms of providing advice to particular countries.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, we will, there is one comment, there are two comments actually, and I ask participants if they have further questions to write them now. We will have opportunity probably for two more before we close. Felipe asks whether the UNEC or others provide opportunities for capacity building for M&E officers, especially on evaluative thinking and learning. I would suggest, Felipe, that we get in touch bilaterally in the coming days, because that is a larger question, and we can provide you information on that. Then we have Christina Berry says, I completely agree with Robert about the power of audit, how they are always more respected than evaluators, and the limitations in their approach, which is more focused on accountability than learning. Evaluation should forcefully emphasize its value added where the value of audit ends. There is a lot to discuss on this. Canada has good experience and suggests UNEC clarify their respective roles right away. Christina continues saying, I think that in regards to demand for evaluation, Parliament in a democratic political system has a great role to play. And finally, Aurélie from FAO says, thank you very much for your very pertinent reflection. There is quite some thinking going on within the evaluation community on what is needed to have evaluation linked up with SDGs and good briefing material, example, IIED SDGs. There is, however, still a need to raise national decision makers' awareness. What channels exist to bring these thoughts and to raise awareness of decision makers, and whose role should it be? Over to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the comments and the nice feedback. Let me respond to the last question, which is whose role should it be to raise awareness of decision makers? What channels exist? I think that this isn't an easy one. I think that, excuse me, I think that UNEG can be playing an important role here because they have the links to, potentially, links to the UN, obviously the UN system, and senior officials in the UN system, also links to officials in countries, and this is where I think and senior officials in individual UN agencies. I think all of these need to have a better, shall we say, appreciation and more respect, shall we say, for evaluation, if evaluation is going to gain some traction in terms of the SDGs. And this is these are probably not easy conversations to take place, but potentially UNEG with its with the power of the network has the ability to do that much easier than any individual, let's say, a head of evaluation in a UN agency that might be seen as challenging the authority of their senior official or of the UN system. I think that the broad set of and networks of VOPEs through Eval Partners, through Eval SDGs, through the IOCE have the potential to be raising these kinds of issues. How they actually, whether or not they get the necessary audience and the necessary traction is something to be seen. Eval SDG and the IIED have been producing these very, very good papers. And the question is, has the world changed in terms of evaluation and the SDGs? My sense is that we as evaluators are more informed. Others are probably more informed, but I'm not sure that the world has changed significantly in terms of the traction for evaluation on the SDGs. So that's why I'm mentioning this broad set, not only the network of Eval SDGs and all that would be entailed there, but also the network of UNEG and UN. I don't have the absolute answer on this. This is just an answer from me in response to this question. I'm sure others would have things to offer. Okay, there was another point being raised. Was it a question or a comment?
Yeah, there are two more, and we will probably close with this. One is about how expensive and time-consuming it is to collect quantitative data, and what are your thoughts about qualitative and participatory approaches for evaluation of the SDGs? And the other is a question about what do you think about the possibility of creating a new, simpler criteria of the SDGs evaluation, something like the standard DAC criteria with quicker and learning-oriented evaluations? Over to you, Bob. This will be the last round of questions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that first question that you mentioned here.
The first question is mainly about thinking about qualitative and participatory approaches when it comes to evaluate SDGs.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's particularly important to have both qualitative and quantitative data, and I think most evaluators would agree with that. The one element that then results from this is that it likely takes more time, and it likely becomes more costly to gather this kind of information. And so I think it's important, and this is one of the challenges. And actually, one of the interesting things about evaluation and evaluative research, and that is you have to recognize that you cannot always move to the best possible methodology or set of methods to address a question. It comes down to the budget that you have and the time limits within which you have to deliver a product. And I think one of the things that has to happen here is that as evaluators, we need to respect the time frame of those people who might be considered as the clients of the evaluation, the people who are asking the questions and who are going to use the information. But certainly in terms of the use of qualitative information, especially with addressing issues of the horizontality, some of these horizontal issues that the SDG are raising, and the reality that there are many indicators, and there are many indicators that will be identified or should be identified that are really not quantitative in nature. They're going to be qualitative to gain an understanding. I guess my final thought on this is that it's not costless. There's a cost required, and so it's important for all officials, including evaluators, but all officials, to recognize that a budget is required to actually carry this out. So the other question, Ada, was, hello, Ada?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. It was mainly about an idea. It's an idea that came that was triggered by Musarrat. She says, what about establishing a simpler criteria like the DAT criteria, focusing on more on the learning and for the evaluation of the SDGs? Let me read it so I can be...
No, I see it here. New, simpler criteria for SDGs evaluation, something like quicker and learning-oriented evaluations. Well, I think the notion of relatively quick learning-oriented evaluations is good. I think we have to be careful that we don't box ourselves in terms of saying one size fits all, because that's generally not the case. But as evaluators, as I've just said in the previous response to the previous question, we need to always be cognizant of the fact that we need to be timely in delivery of evaluation work. Some evaluation work would typically take longer, cost more. Other evaluation work a whole lot less. So it isn't simply one size fits all. But I think this notion of saying really looking at the kind of evaluation, the kinds of issues, I think it would be a good one. If we're looking at an individual country, I mentioned early on the notion of the theory of change, which starts identifying the really, I think, not only indicators that are relevant, but also the assumptions and the issues associated with those assumptions upon which success is based. I think that this is something that Eval SDG might want to be thinking about in terms of offering up useful advice and providing through one of your working groups or sub-working group. It could be an interesting one to follow up on.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And we have some other comments, but we need to close now. Robert, I echo what participants are putting in the chat, that this has been an excellent presentation. It has been attended but more than 70 people, that normally is a record in terms of attendance. The discussion has been vibrant, and we are all grateful for your contribution. I would like to tell participants that we, as usual, we will be sharing the presentation and the recording of the webinar a few days after this webinar. Last but not least, our co-chair, Evaluative's co-chair, Dorothy Lux, that was supposed to moderate this webinar, had technical problems. She's currently in Papua New Guinea, PMG, but she was able to join. So I would like to give to join a bit late, but she was able to make it. So Dorothy, the floor is yours to close this very interesting and relevant webinar. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ada. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, loud and clear.
I can hear you. Thank you. Thanks, Dorothy.
Wonderful. I'm very sorry, but these are the development challenges, I think, that we're talking about, that we have to understand the realities of what we're dealing with. So I was able to hear, but not able to see the slides. But listening to the discussions, these are really important points. And Bob, your contribution worldwide is recognized and much appreciated. and it's been very valuable having your wisdom with us and these points that help us all to think about, what's our own responsibility, what are our roles in promoting evaluation of the SDGs and making sure that practice is up to date. And you've given us some really good practical things to think about in our own practice and in our own situations. Thank you very much to those of you who've joined from around the world. I think many who have good connection, and also people that are, perhaps unable to connect to evaluation events in person. So having webinars allows us to have access to people of the caliber of Bob to help us in our practice. So many thanks to you, Bob. Thanks to Ada and Kassem for stepping in with my connection problems, and thank you all for attending, and we hope that you will join us on the next webinar with Eval SDGs. Thank you.
Dorothy, let me just say thank you for those nice words, and I certainly commend the work that you and Ada and Kassem and the full team with Eval SDGs has been doing to work towards this goal of trying to ensure that evaluation gets integrated in the SDGs. And so these webinars serve as one element, but I know there are many other things. So let me toss back the thank you and congratulations to all of you for the good work you've been doing.
Thank you very much, Bob, and we wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or if you're like me on this side of the world, good midnight. Thanks to everybody, and we'll be in contact again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Celeste.
Celeste, thank you for your help.